You eat salads every day, you cut out processed food, you added fermented vegetables, fiber-rich grains, and gut-friendly foods that every health article in the world told you to add. And every single day, the bloating comes. The pressure builds. The gas arrives. Not just a little. Before we go further, here's what this video will give you by the time it ends. First, I will explain the real biological mechanism behind gas production in people who eat healthy, and why it is fundamentally different from gas in people who eat poorly. Second, I will walk you through the 5 specific food behaviors that drive overfermentation in a dysbiotic gut, behaviors that most gut health articles praise without ever giving you this context. Third, I will walk you through 3 composite patient cases from my clinical practice, each with a different pattern and a different resolution. Fourth, I will give you the 7-step protocol I use with patients who come to me exactly like you. Stay through the end. The 7th point in the protocol is the one that almost nobody talks about, and it is often the one that breaks the cycle. I have spent the last 16 years working with patients who came to me frustrated, dismissed by earlier providers, and convinced that their bodies were simply broken. Let me tell you about a patient. I will call her Jennifer. She was 47 years old, a middle school art teacher from a mid-sized city in the Midwest. For most of her adult life, she had eaten what she called a standard American diet. Not extreme, not fast food every night. In her mid-40s, she decided to make a serious change. She read 3 books on gut health, joined an online community, cut out refined sugar, white bread, and processed meat. She added cruciferous vegetables every day. She started eating lentils and chickpeas. She bought kimchi and sauerkraut and kombucha. She was doing everything right. Within 6 weeks, Jennifer was in my office. The gas was so severe that she had started declining social invitations. She had stopped eating lunch at school because she was afraid of what would happen in the afternoon. She had gained 2 inches around her waist from bloating, even though her overall food intake had not increased. She was eating cleaner than she ever had in her life, and she felt worse than she had in years. When Jennifer told me what she was eating, my first thought was not that she had made bad choices. My first thought was that she had made excellent choices for a different gut. The gut she had before the diet change was accustomed to low-fiber, low-fermentation foods. The bacteria populations that produce gas as a byproduct of fermentation were now suddenly receiving a massive, continuous fuel supply they were not capable of processing efficiently. Jennifer had, without knowing it, fed a dysbiotic microbiome exactly the foods that cause dysbiosis to produce its most visible symptom. She had essentially handed a faulty engine premium fuel and been surprised that it knocked louder than before. That is the situation I see several times a week. And Jennifer is not unusual. She is the norm. Before I explain the mechanism behind what happened to Jennifer, I want you to hold on to one question, because the answer is going to reframe everything you think you know about healthy eating and your gut. The question is this: if the foods causing your gas are good for you, why does eating less of them feel better in the short term? Here is what is actually happening in the gut of a healthy eater who still produces excess gas. The colon houses between 38 and 100 trillion bacteria. Those bacteria ferment the food that passes through your small intestine undigested. Most high-fiber, plant-forward foods contain a class of carbohydrates called FODMAPs, which stands for fermentable oligosaccharides. These carbohydrates are, by definition, poorly absorbed in the small intestine. They pass into the colon intact, where bacteria ferment them. Fermentation produces gases. Specifically, it produces hydrogen, carbon dioxide, and in some people, methane. In a healthy, diverse microbiome, this fermentation process is balanced. Many different bacterial strains participate. The gases produced are consumed or processed by other bacterial populations before they accumulate. The byproducts of fermentation in a balanced gut include short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, which actively heal the gut lining and reduce inflammation. Fermentation, in other words, is supposed to happen. It is a feature, not a flaw. But here is where it goes wrong. When the microbiome is dysbiotic, meaning when the balance of bacterial populations is skewed, fermentation becomes imbalanced. Certain gas-producing strains overgrow. The populations that would normally consume excess hydrogen are underrepresented. The result is not just fermentation, it is overfermentation. Gases accumulate faster than they can be processed or expelled. That accumulation causes the bloating, the pressure, and the continuous low-grade gas that healthy eaters experience. It merely starves the entire system, beneficial bacteria included. The healthy eater who cuts out vegetables and fiber to reduce gas is not healing their gut. They are quieting a signal that was trying to tell them something. There is a second mechanism that layers on top of this one. When you rapidly increase fiber intake in a dysbiotic gut, you are not just feeding the beneficial bacteria you want to grow, you are feeding every bacterial population that can metabolize fiber, including the ones producing the most gas. The first weeks and months of a high-fiber diet in a dysbiotic gut are, biologically, but without understanding this mechanism, most patients conclude that the healthy foods are the problem and abandon the diet that would have eventually helped them. There is a third factor that almost nobody discusses in consumer gut health content: intestinal motility. Gas is only a problem when it accumulates. If transit time through the colon is normal, gas produced by fermentation is expelled continuously and in small amounts. When motility is slow, gas accumulates between expulsion events, producing pressure and bloating, the network of neurons lining the gut wall. So the gas produced by overfermentation is also being retained longer than it would be in a gut with normal motility. Those three mechanisms together, overfermentation, dysbiotic imbalance, and slowed motility, explain the pattern that Jennifer and thousands of patients like her experience. Eating healthy, feeling worse, not understanding why. The three cases I want to walk you through each illustrate a different pattern within this problem. Understanding which pattern applies to you is the first step toward correcting it. The first case is Jennifer, the rapid overhauler. You met Jennifer in the earlier section. Her pattern is what I call the rapid microbiome shock pattern. She made a large, fast dietary change. The shift in substrate, meaning the fuel available to her gut bacteria, was dramatic and sudden. Her microbiome had not accumulated the bacterial populations needed to handle the new fuel load efficiently. The intervention that worked for Jennifer was not to abandon the healthy foods. It was to slow the introduction rate dramatically. We reduced her cruciferous vegetable intake by 2/3 for 6 weeks. We removed the kombucha and kimchi temporarily. Not because fermented foods are harmful, but because adding fermented foods to a dysbiotic gut can sometimes increase bacterial populations that were already overrepresented. We reintroduced foods one category at a time over a period of 12 weeks, giving the microbiome time to adapt its population distribution. By week 20, she described herself as more comfortable than she had been in a decade. The second case is Carol, the long-term healthy eater. Carol was 59 years old, a hospital administrator from the Pacific Northwest. She had been eating a clean diet for 11 years. She was not a recent convert. She had eaten high-fiber, plant-forward food for over a decade. The gas had always been there, from the very beginning of the diet change, and it had never improved. Carol's case was different from Jennifer's because time had not resolved the problem. This told me that her dysbiosis was not a transitional state, but an established one. When we ran a comprehensive stool analysis, we found a significant overgrowth of methane-producing archaea, organisms called Methanobrevibacter smithii, which use the hydrogen produced by other bacteria as their own fuel source and release methane as a byproduct. Methane-dominant gut environments are associated with slower motility and persistent bloating. They do not self-correct with dietary change alone. Carol's intervention required a targeted reduction in the methane-producing population, followed by a structured reintroduction of hydrogen-consuming bacterial strains through specific prebiotic foods. It was a more complex protocol, but Carol had a more complex underlying state. Her gas was substantially reduced within 10 weeks of beginning the correct intervention. The third case is David, the hidden SIBO patient. David was 42 years old, a project manager from the Southwest. He had switched to a Mediterranean-style diet 8 months before coming to see me. He exercised regularly, his blood work was excellent, and he had gas so persistent that it was affecting his work concentration and his relationship with his partner. Now here is the detail that changed everything for David, and that I want you to pay attention to, because it may apply to you. Fast onset gas is a different clinical picture. It suggested that fermentation was happening not only in the colon, where it belongs, but also in the small intestine, where it does not. We confirmed small intestinal bacterial overgrowth through a hydrogen breath test. SIBO is a condition in which bacteria that belong in the colon migrate into the small intestine, where they begin fermenting food before it has finished being digested and absorbed. In the small intestine, that fermentation produces gas in a confined space where accumulation happens quickly. David's Mediterranean diet, which is among the healthiest dietary patterns documented in the medical literature, was providing exactly the right substrates for SIBO to produce maximal gas. His intervention required addressing the bacterial overgrowth directly, which we did, followed by a gradual dietary reintroduction protocol similar to Jennifer's. Within 6 weeks, the rapid onset gas was gone. 3 patients, 3 different underlying states, 1 shared surface symptom. The treatment that works for Jennifer does not work for Carol. The protocol that resolves Carol's problem would not have touched David's. This is why understanding the pattern matters before choosing the intervention. Here is the protocol I use with patients who present with exactly this pattern. If you are in the early stages of a dietary overhaul, cut your pace in half. Introduce 1 new high-fiber food category per 2 weeks, not 3 categories at once. Your microbiome needs time to develop the bacterial populations that can efficiently process new substrates. In a gut that is already overproducing gas, adding live bacterial cultures in large quantities can initially worsen gas as new bacterial populations establish themselves. This is not a permanent restriction, it is a sequencing strategy. Point 3. Evaluate your fiber sources. Not all fiber behaves the same way in the gut. Soluble fiber, found in oats, psyllium husk, and cooked carrots, ferments more slowly and tends to produce less gas than insoluble fiber sources like raw cruciferous vegetables and unprocessed wheat bran. If you are experiencing severe gas, shifting your primary fiber sources temporarily towards soluble fiber options gives the microbiome a lower intensity fermentation environment, while bacterial populations adjust. Point 4. Assess transit time. Eat a serving of beets or corn, both of which produce identifiable color changes in stool, and note how many hours pass before you see the marker appear in people with fermentation-driven symptoms. It is not a permanent diet, it is a diagnostic and therapeutic tool. You remove high FODMAP foods for 4 to 6 weeks, observe your symptom response, and then reintroduce foods systematically to identify your personal tolerance thresholds. The goal is not permanent restriction. The goal is to understand which specific fermentable carbohydrates your gut is currently least equipped to handle, so you can sequence their reintroduction more carefully. Point 6. Look for fast onset gas as a SIBO signal. If your gas begins within 60 minutes of eating, regardless of what you eat, that is a different clinical profile from slow onset fermentation gas. Fast onset gas in the upper abdomen after any meal, accompanied by early fullness and upper bloating, is a pattern worth discussing with a gastroenterologist. If it is, dietary adjustment alone will not resolve the problem. The bacterial overgrowth needs to be addressed first. Point 7. Give the process time and track it. This is the point most often omitted from consumer gut health content. The microbiome does not reorganize itself in 2 weeks. Meaningful, measurable population shifts in the bacterial communities of the colon. The question to ask is not whether the diet is wrong. The question is whether you have given the diet enough time, and whether you have the additional clinical factors, SIBO, methane dominance, motility dysfunction, that require intervention beyond dietary change alone. Track your symptoms weekly. Note improvements, even small ones. In most cases, the trajectory is positive. The timeline is just longer than we expect. Here is something that almost nobody in the consumer gut health space is talking about yet, and it is one of the most significant developments in microbiome research in recent years. The bacteria in your gut do not just respond to what you eat, they respond to when you eat it. Circadian disruption, meaning eating late at night, eating at irregular intervals, or eating your largest meal after 8 in the evening, appears to alter the composition of the microbiome in ways that directly affect fermentation behavior. Research published in recent years from institutions including the Weizmann Institute has demonstrated that the timing of food intake influences which bacterial populations are most active during the fermentation window. Evening and nighttime eating appears to favor bacterial populations with higher gas-producing fermentation profiles. This means that the same meal eaten at noon and at 9 in the evening may produce meaningfully different gas responses in the same gut, not because of what you ate, but because of when the dominant bacterial populations were most active. Shifting the meal timing earlier is a variable worth testing alongside everything else in this protocol. It costs nothing to test. The results in my patients who have tried it are often surprising. If everything I have covered today resonates with your situation, I have put together a free guide called the Gut Reset Protocol that walks you through the sequenced reintroduction plan I use with patients. It includes the FODMAP food reference list, the transit time self-assessment instructions, and the 4-week symptom tracking sheet that gives you actual data to bring to a conversation with your doctor. A note on one resource I have found clinically useful and that I recommend to patients who want a structured approach to supporting their microbiome during a reintroduction protocol. Seed has developed a symbiotic formulation, meaning a combination of pre- and probiotic. I am telling you that if you are going to add a probiotic while working through a reintroduction protocol, the strain selection and formulation quality matters more than most people realize, and I have been comfortable recommending their work to patients. It does not constitute medical advice. Jennifer, Carol, and David are composites based on clinical patterns observed across multiple patients. Please consult your physician before making changes to your diet or supplement protocol. I am not your treating physician. The information here is a starting point for a conversation with someone who can evaluate your full clinical picture. Second, a disclosure I believe matters in the current moment of health content online. Dr. Nathan Cruz is an AI-generated educational persona. The clinical information presented in this video is based on current gastroenterological research and is reviewed for accuracy. But you are interacting with an educational content format, not a live physician. If anything in this video raises questions or concerns about your own health, please bring those questions to a real clinical provider who can examine you. Your gut is not rejecting the healthy choices you are making. It is asking you to make them more carefully, more patiently, and with more clinical awareness than the popular gut health conversation usually offers. Understanding that transition is the difference between abandoning a diet that would have helped you, it was not previously prepared for, and giving it the conditions it needs to actually work. If you recognized your own pattern in what Jennifer, Carol, or David experienced,